I never expected to own property in Oak Ridge Estates. The letter from the attorney had been sitting on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I finally opened it. My great-uncle Harold had passed away and left me his house. I had met him exactly twice in my life, both times at family reunions when I was too young to form lasting memories. All I knew was that he was considered the eccentric recluse of the family, the kind relatives whispered about but never directly criticized. The first time I pulled into the driveway, I understood why the neighborhood association might have had issues with Uncle Harold. His house stood out like a sore thumb among the pristine colonials and craftsman homes that lined Oak Ridge Drive. The Victorian-style house had character, peeling blue paint, intricate woodwork, and a garden that had clearly been designed by someone who prioritized natural growth over manicured perfection. It was not messy, just deliberately wild in a sea of controlled landscaping. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The interior was surprisingly well maintained. Hardwood floors gleamed under a layer of dust. Antique furniture spoke of an appreciation for craftsmanship. Photographs lined the walls, many featuring landscapes I did not recognize and people from decades past. I spent that first day simply wandering room to room, trying to understand the man who had left me this unexpected gift. The basement door creaked as I opened it. Motion-activated lights flickered on, revealing not the usual storage space but what looked like a mechanical room. Pipes of various sizes ran along the ceiling. Gauges and valves lined one wall, and dominating the center of the room was an enormous metal tank with a pressure gauge and multiple connection points. This was far more complex than any normal residential water system. I ran my hand along the cool metal of the tank. Old maintenance logs hung from a clipboard nearby, dating back decades. The craftsmanship was evident. This system had been built to last generations. But why would a single-family home need something so elaborate? The question lingered as I headed back upstairs to continue exploring my inheritance. The doorbell rang just as I was examining old photographs in the living room. Through the stained glass window beside the door, I could make out the silhouette of a woman with perfectly styled hair. I opened the door to find a middle-aged woman in a pink polo shirt and white capri pants. Her smile seemed practiced rather than genuine. "You must be Harold's relative," she said, extending a manicured hand. "I am Patricia Wilson, president of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. We are all so pleased someone will be taking over the property." I shook her hand. "Thank you, I am still getting used to the idea myself." Her eyes moved past me, scanning the interior. I knew Harold for 20 years. He was quite resistant to community standards. "I hope you will find it easier to work with our HOA guidelines." She handed me a thick binder. "Everything you need to know is in here. Compliance inspections happen monthly." Patricia, or Karen, as I would come to think of her, spent more time looking at potential violations than making actual conversation. Her gaze lingered on the overgrown garden, the non-standard mailbox, the wind chimes hanging from the porch. By the time she left, I felt less like a new neighbor and more like a problem to be managed. The next morning, I found my first orange violation notice taped to my front door. "Landscaping fails to meet community standards, section 5.3. I had been in the neighborhood less than 24 hours. Looking at the notice, I had no idea that this small piece of paper was just the beginning of a neighborhood war that would test my patience, resilience, and ultimately reveal secrets about my property that not even Karen herself fully understood. The renovation process began slowly. I focused first on making the house livable, fixing leaky faucets, updating ancient wiring, and clearing decades of accumulated possessions. Most of my neighbors seemed friendly, stopping by with baked goods or offers of help. Only Patricia Wilson kept her distance, though I frequently caught her taking photos of my property from across the street. My curiosity about the basement water system grew with each passing day. The maintenance logs showed regular checks and balances of pressure readings, but gave little explanation of what the system actually did. One entry from 1987 caught my eye. Pressure drop in Sector 3. Wilson property connection adjusted. Wilson, like Patricia Wilson. The coincidence seemed too perfect. I decided to call in an expert. Frank Martinez was a retired plumber whose name appeared in several of the maintenance logs. When he arrived and saw me, his weathered face broke into a smile. "You look like him, you know. Same eyes as your uncle," Frank said as we descended into the basement. When the lights revealed the water system, Frank let out a low whistle. He kept it in good shape. Not many people understand how important this setup is. Frank explained as he checked various gauges and connections. This house was the first one built in this area, back in the 1920s. Your uncle's grandfather established the water line that eventually served the entire neighborhood. When the development company came in the 1960s and built all these cookie-cutter homes, they connected to the existing infrastructure. "Are you saying my house still provides water to the neighborhood?" I asked, incredulous. Frank shook his head. "Not exactly. The city took over the main supply decades ago, but this system still helps maintain proper water pressure for about 8 blocks, especially for homes at higher elevations. The city wanted to replace it all in the 90s, but your uncle fought them with historical preservation laws. Got grandfathered in as essential infrastructure." The revelation was stunning. My eccentric uncle had been silently maintaining a water system that benefited the entire neighborhood, including Patricia Wilson, whose house Frank confirmed sat at one of the highest points in the development. That night I was awakened by a strange sound, running water, but not from inside the house. I grabbed a flashlight and followed the noise to the backyard. A puddle was forming near an external access point to the water tank. The water level gauge I had checked before bed now showed a significant drop. I closed the valve that had mysteriously opened and went back to bed, assuming it was a mechanical failure. But 3 nights later it happened again, and again the following week. Each time, the water level in the tank dropped significantly overnight. The pressure gauge in the basement showed corresponding drops. Something was not adding up. "Motion-activated security cameras," my friend Elliot suggested when I explained the situation over lunch. "If it is mechanical failure, you will know, and if it is not." I installed the cameras that weekend, hiding them carefully among the garden foliage with clear views of all access points to the water system. For several days, nothing happened. Then, at 2:14 a.m. on Thursday, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. The night vision footage was unmistakable. A figure in a hooded jacket slipped through my back gate, moved directly to the external valve, and systematically opened it to drain the tank. As the person turned to leave, the infrared light caught their face. Patricia Wilson. She moved with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before, who knew exactly which valve to turn and how far. I watched the footage 3 times in disbelief. The HOA president was deliberately sneaking onto my property to drain my water tank in the middle of the night. But why? What could she possibly gain from this? I remembered Frank's words about homes at higher elevations and pressure requirements. Was it possible she knew more about my uncle's water system than she let on? The question kept me awake long after I closed the valve and restored the water levels. By morning, I had made my decision. It was time to confront Patricia Wilson with evidence in hand and demand answers about her nighttime activities on my property. I rehearsed what I would say as I walked up the perfectly manicured path to Patricia Wilson's front door. The pristine white colonial sat proudly at the highest point of Oak Ridge Drive, its position offering panoramic views of the neighborhood below. I rang the doorbell, clutching my phone with the incriminating video queued up. Patricia opened the door. Her pleasant expression faltered momentarily when she recognized me, then quickly reassembled itself into a polite smile. "Can I help you with something? If this is about the violation notices, all appeals must be submitted in writing to the HOA board." "This is not about violations," I replied, maintaining a calm I did not feel. "May I come in? I have something you need to see." Her living room was exactly what I expected: beige and cream tones, catalog-perfect furniture, and not a single item out of place. Family photos showed Patricia with a husband and 2 college-aged children. Awards for Garden of the Year and Outstanding Community Service lined one shelf. I held out my phone. "This was recorded on my property at 2:14 a.m. yesterday morning." Patricia watched, her face transitioning from confusion to shock to immediate denial. The footage clearly showed her opening the valve and checking her watch as water began to drain. "That is ridiculous," she said, pushing the phone away. "That could be anyone. And what are you implying? That I sneak around in the middle of the night messing with your plumbing? For what possible reason would I do such a thing?" "That is what I would like to know," I said. "The footage is very clear, Patricia. It shows you on my property draining my water tank. This is not the first time, is it?" Her demeanor changed instantly. "I do not appreciate these accusations. That old house of yours is a blight on this community, and these wild claims just confirm what everyone says about Harold's family. I suggest you leave immediately before I call the police and report you for harassment." I left, but her overreaction only confirmed my suspicions. Something was definitely not right, and Patricia Wilson knew exactly what she was doing when she drained my tank repeatedly. I needed more information. The city planning office was housed in a brutalist concrete building downtown. The clerk looked bored when I requested historical utility maps for Oak Ridge Estates, but perked up when I mentioned my address. "The Harold Bishop property. That place has quite the file." She disappeared into a back room and returned with a large tube containing rolled blueprints. "These are the original water system schematics. They have been digitized, but engineers still request the originals sometimes because of the handwritten notes." I spread the blueprints across the table. Lines in blue ink showed water mains, connection points, and pressure regulation stations. What struck me immediately was how many lines connected to my property. From there, they spread outward like a spider web, reaching to every corner of what would become Oak Ridge Estates. The clerk pointed to handwritten notes in the margins. "According to this, your property contains what they called a pressure equalizing system. When the development was built, the city water pressure was not sufficient for homes at higher elevations. Your uncle's water tank system creates additional pressure that feeds into the main line. So without my tank maintaining pressure, the homes at higher elevations would have problems," I asked. "Technically, yes, especially now during summer when water usage is at its peak. The city has improved the main system over the years, but according to these notes, that auxiliary pressure is still factored into the overall grid design." I thanked the clerk and left with digital copies of all relevant documents. My next stop was Evergreen Utilities, where I hoped to find someone who could explain the technical aspects in more detail. James Chen was a water systems engineer who had worked for the utility company for over 30 years. He studied the blueprints on his tablet with growing interest. "This is fascinating," he said. "Your property contains what we would now call a pressure booster system. It was state-of-the-art for its time and apparently well-maintained. Without it, houses at higher elevations would experience significant pressure drops during peak usage times. Like during a heat wave when everyone is watering their lawns," I asked. "Exactly, and the highest properties would be most affected." He pulled up a topographical map of the neighborhood, like these homes here. He circled an area that included Patricia Wilson Street. "What would happen if someone deliberately drained the pressure tank repeatedly?" I asked. James frowned. "Short term, not much. The system would compensate. But done regularly, it would create pressure fluctuations throughout the grid. The highest homes would notice it first. Weak showers, poor irrigation coverage, that sort of thing." The pieces began falling into place. Patricia's award-winning garden required significant watering. Her home's elevation made it vulnerable to pressure drops, and based on the timing of her nighttime visits, she was draining my tank regularly to manipulate the neighborhood's water pressure for her own benefit. "One more question," I said. "If someone reported my system as dangerous or unauthorized, what would happen?" "The city would have to investigate. They might even shut it down temporarily while they determine if it meets code. But according to these documents, your system is legally grandfathered in. It is part of the neighborhood's approved infrastructure." As I drove home, the full picture became clear. Patricia Wilson knew exactly what my uncle's water system did. She had been manipulating it for years, possibly even before his death. And now that I had caught her, she was likely planning something even more drastic to protect her perfect home on the hill. The campaign against me began slowly, then accelerated with frightening precision. First came the violation notices, not just for my overgrown garden, but for unauthorized plumbing fixtures, non-compliant water storage, and potential contamination risk to neighborhood systems. Each notice cited HOA bylaws that seemed specifically designed to target my property. Then came the letters in neighbors' mailboxes. I discovered these when Sam Fletcher from 2 doors down brought one over, concerned about its contents. The letter, on official HOA letterhead, warned about dangerous and outdated water systems at my address that posed significant health risks to the entire community. It encouraged neighbors to report any unusual water issues directly to Patricia Wilson. "Is any of this true?" Sam asked, handing me the letter. "Janet across the street said her water has been looking cloudy, and Patricia told her it might be coming from your place." I explained the reality of the situation, showing Sam the historical documentation and city permits. "My system actually helps maintain water pressure for the neighborhood, especially for homes up the hill like Patricia's. And I had the water tested last week. It is completely clean." Sam seemed relieved but confused. "Then why is Patricia telling everyone your place is dangerous?" That question was answered the following week when notices appeared announcing an emergency HOA meeting to discuss critical infrastructure concerns. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at the community center. I prepared my documentation, practiced my explanation, and arrived 15 minutes early. The room was already packed. Patricia stood at the front, arranging papers on a podium, occasionally whispering to 3 older residents I recognized as HOA board members. A projector displayed a PowerPoint titled "Addressing Critical Water Safety Concerns." Patricia called the meeting to order, her voice carrying the grave tone of someone announcing a natural disaster. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. As many of you know, We have been monitoring a situation regarding non-compliant water systems at the Bishop property. She clicked to a slide showing a badly corroded pipe that I had never seen before in my life. This is just one example of the deteriorating infrastructure that could be contaminating our neighborhood water supply. She clicked through more slides: rust-covered valves, leaking connections, stagnant water. None of these images were from my property, but the implication was clear. The current owner has refused to address these violations, Patricia continued, not looking in my direction. And now several residents have reported water quality issues. We believe immediate action is required. I stood up, documentation in hand. None of those photos are from my property. My system is fully permitted and regularly inspected. Patricia spoke over me. We will take questions after the presentation. As I was saying, the board recommends immediate enforcement action, including daily fines until the system is removed or replaced at the owner's expense. I tried again. The city has confirmed that my system is legally grandfathered. Patricia nodded to someone in the back, and suddenly the microphone in front of me went dead. "Technical difficulties," she said smoothly. "Please hold your comments." For the next 30 minutes, Patricia presented misleading information, doctored photographs, and out-of-context quotes from plumbing codes. By the time she finished, many of my neighbors were shooting concerned glances in my direction. When the question period finally began, the first 3 people called upon were clearly Patricia's supporters, asking rehearsed questions about property values and water safety. When I finally got a chance to speak, the microphone mysteriously cut out every few seconds, making my explanation sound disjointed and defensive. Patricia skillfully redirected each of my points, twisting them to support her narrative. By the end of the meeting, a vote had been taken to authorize emergency measures regarding my property. As people filed out, Patricia approached with 2 board members flanking her. "The board has authorized daily fines of $200 until the non-compliant system is removed," she said, handing me an official notice. "Additionally, we have filed a complaint with the city water department. I suggest you start looking for a licensed contractor." I stood in the emptying room, notice in hand, watching Patricia shake hands and accept congratulations from her supporters. A few neighbors gave me sympathetic looks, but no one stopped to hear my side. The isolation was palpable. The certified letter arrived 3 days later. It contained formal notification of $4,200 in accumulated fines, threats of property liens if not paid within 30 days, and a court date for an HOA-initiated injunction to force removal of my water system. Patricia had escalated from nighttime sabotage to full-scale legal warfare. My phone rang that evening, the city water department scheduling an emergency inspection. Patricia's complaint had worked. They would be shutting down my system temporarily for a comprehensive safety evaluation. Little did I know that this inspection would become the turning point in our increasingly bitter neighborhood conflict. The heat wave hit suddenly in the 3rd week of July. Temperatures soared above 100 degrees for 5 consecutive days, turning Oak Ridge Estates into a shimmering mirage of sprinklers and kiddie pools. I woke early on Thursday to water my slowly recovering garden before the worst heat of the day. I turned the faucet. Nothing happened, not even a sputter or drip. Inside the house, every tap was the same, completely dry. I checked the basement. The pressure gauge on my tank read 0. The main connection valve was shut and tagged with an official city notice: "System deactivated pending safety inspection." I immediately called the water department. After 20 minutes on hold, a sympathetic representative named Maura checked my account. I see the issue, she said. We received an urgent report about illegal modifications to your water system that could pose contamination risks. In these cases, we have to shut down service until an inspector can verify compliance. Who filed the report? I asked, though I already knew the answer. A Patricia Wilson. It says here she is the HOA president for your neighborhood and has specific concerns about non-permitted historical infrastructure. The inspection was scheduled for that afternoon. Until then, I had no water during the worst heat wave of the summer. I called my neighbor Sam, who immediately brought over several gallons of drinking water. As we carried them inside, I noticed Patricia's sprinkler system running full blast, keeping her award-winning roses perfectly hydrated despite the water conservation notices that had gone out to the neighborhood. Thomas Brooks from the city water department arrived precisely at 2 p.m. He was in his late 50s, with the weathered hands of someone who had spent decades working with pipes and tools. "Let us see this dangerous system that has everyone so worked up," he said, following me to the basement. Thomas spent nearly 2 hours examining every inch of my water system. He checked pressure gauges, tested water quality, examined connection points, and reviewed the historical documentation I had gathered. Occasionally, he made appreciative noises or nodded with respect at some aspect of the engineering. Finally, he closed his inspection notebook and turned to me. "This system is remarkable. Your uncle maintained it beautifully. Not only is it not dangerous, but it is actually a textbook example of sustainable water infrastructure." "So it meets code?" I asked. "It exceeds modern code in most areas," Thomas said. "And you are correct that it is protected under historical infrastructure provisions. Your uncle made sure of that back in '92 when the city tried to decommission it. There is absolutely no reason for it to be shut down." He removed the tag from my main valve and restored my water service. Whoever reported this as dangerous either does not understand basic water systems or deliberately misrepresented it. As the pressure built back up in my pipes, a knock came at the door. It was Janet from across the street looking distressed. "I am sorry to bother you," she said, "but did your water just come back on? Ours has been terrible all week, barely a trickle upstairs, but it suddenly improved a few minutes ago." Thomas overheard and joined the conversation. Together, we pieced together what had been happening. Multiple neighbors had experienced water pressure issues during the heat wave, but only when my system was drained or deactivated. The problems were most severe for homes near Patricia's elevation. Another neighbor joined our impromptu gathering, then another. As they shared their experiences, a pattern emerged. Water pressure problems had mysteriously coincided with Patricia's garden winning awards year after year. Her perfect lawn stayed green through water restrictions. Her elaborate water features never seemed affected by the occasional pressure drops that plagued others. "She has been manipulating the neighborhood water system for years," Janet realized, "and using your uncle as the scapegoat when people complained." Thomas confirmed our suspicions. Based on these system readings, someone has been regularly tampering with these valves. That disrupts pressure throughout the grid, but creates beneficial conditions for properties at certain elevations, like those on Hillcrest Drive, where Patricia lived. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by neighbors who had been turned against me through manipulation and lies. The water running freely from my tap represented more than restored service. It represented truth finally flowing after years of deception. "Enough is enough," I said, my resolution hardening into determination. "It is time to fight back." The coffee shop table was covered with blueprints, legal documents, and technical diagrams. Across from me sat Anita Desai, a water systems engineer recommended by Thomas from the city. Her expertise had come at a premium price, but her insights were already proving invaluable. "The system your uncle maintained is quite ingenious," Anita said, tracing distribution paths on the blueprints. "It creates a secondary pressure zone that supplements the city supply, especially beneficial for properties at higher elevations." "Like Patricia Wilson's house," I noted. "Exactly. Without your pressure boosting system, homes in that elevation range would experience significant drops during peak usage times. Their showers would be weak, toilets would refill slowly, and most importantly for someone like Patricia, her sprinkler system would not work properly," I finished. Anita nodded. "During water restrictions, the city reduces main pressure. Properties at your elevation barely notice, but those uphill suffer, unless they have access to a secondary pressure source." The legal documents told an equally interesting story. My attorney, Marcus Hayward, had discovered that my property carried specific historical easements related to water distribution. "Your uncle established these easements decades ago," Marcus explained. "They grant your property certain rights regarding water distribution, but also place responsibilities on you as the owner. Patricia has been taking advantage of the benefits while trying to eliminate the property that provides them." Our strategy took shape over the next 2 weeks. First, I installed professional monitoring equipment throughout my water system, digital pressure gauges, flow meters, and time-stamped recording devices at every access point. Multiple cameras now covered every approach to my property, feeding to a secure cloud server. Anita installed special trackers in the main distribution points. These will record pressure fluctuations and identify exactly which properties benefit when your system is functioning versus when it is compromised, she explained. The data began telling its story immediately. When my system operated normally, water pressure was consistent throughout the neighborhood. When someone tampered with my valves, which Patricia continued to do despite the confrontation, pressure dropped significantly for most homes, but actually improved for a select few at the highest elevations. I reached out to neighbors who had experienced water issues. Sam helped arrange private meetings where I could share what I had discovered without Patricia learning of our coalition. Many were initially skeptical, but the technical evidence was compelling. Thomas from the water department attended several of these gatherings, lending official credibility to my claims. Janet brought her elderly mother, who had lived in the neighborhood since the first developments were built. "I remember your uncle arguing with the developers," she recalled. "They wanted to remove his water system, but he fought them because he knew the neighborhood needed it. Patricia moved in a year later and immediately started complaining about him being difficult whenever he maintained the system." More neighbors shared stories of mysterious water issues coinciding with HOA meetings where they had opposed Patricia's policies. A pattern of manipulation emerged that stretched back years. My uncle had known what Patricia was doing, but had chosen to maintain the system regardless, prioritizing the neighborhood's needs over his own comfort. The physical evidence continued mounting. Security footage showed Patricia accessing my property 5 more times over a 2-week period, always during early morning hours when she thought no one would notice. Each visit corresponded with her elaborate garden watering schedule, which violated the current water restrictions, but somehow never resulted in the brown patches other lawns displayed. My kitchen table became command central for what neighbors now called Operation Waterworks. Maps of the neighborhood covered one wall, with pins marking affected homes. Flow charts displayed water usage patterns. Statements from residents were collected and notarized. Even the city water department provided official documentation confirming the historical significance and current necessity of my system. "We need to be strategic about how we present this," Marcus advised. "Patricia has significant influence in the HOA. If she gets wind of what we are planning, she will try to discredit us before we can make our case." We chose the upcoming quarterly HOA meeting for our revelation. Patricia had already placed final action on Bishop property water violations on the agenda, clearly planning to force removal of my system once and for all. She had no idea that nearly half the room would be armed with evidence of her years of manipulation. The night before the meeting, I stood in my garden watching the sunset. For the first time since inheriting the property, I felt connected to my uncle's legacy. He had silently maintained a system that benefited everyone, even those who vilified him. Tomorrow, the truth would finally come to light. I checked the monitoring system one last time before bed. All gauges showed normal pressure. The cameras were active. Everything was in place for the confrontation that had been building since the day Patricia Wilson first set foot on my property. The community center was packed beyond capacity for the quarterly HOA meeting. Extra chairs had been brought in to accommodate the unusually large turnout. Patricia sat at the front table with the other board members, looking confident in a crisp blue blazer with the HOA president pin prominently displayed. She raised an eyebrow when I entered with Sam, Janet, and several other neighbors walking purposefully beside me. I carried a laptop and small projector. Thomas from the water department and Anita had arrived separately and sat inconspicuously among the crowd. My attorney, Marcus, positioned himself near the back, legal documents ready if needed. Patricia called the meeting to order promptly at 7 p.m. After moving quickly through standard business items, she reached the agenda item she had clearly been anticipating. "Now we move to final action regarding the Bishop property water violations," Patricia announced. "The board has prepared a resolution requiring immediate removal of the non-compliant system and payment of all accrued fines. Before we vote, does anyone have comments?" I stood immediately. "I would like to make a presentation." Patricia frowned. "This matter has already been thoroughly discussed. Section 8 of the HOA bylaws grants property owners the right to present evidence before final actions," Marcus called from the back. "My client is exercising that right." Patricia's lips thinned to a tight line as I connected my laptop to the projector. The screen behind the board table illuminated with the title, "Understanding Oak Ridge Estates Water Distribution: Facts and Evidence." "Many of you have experienced water pressure issues over the years," I began. "What you may not know is that these issues were not random or due to city supply problems. They were deliberately created." I clicked to the first exhibit, the original blueprints showing how my property's water system connected to the neighborhood grid. Thomas stood and provided a brief explanation of the technical aspects, confirming that my system was not only legal but essential for proper water pressure throughout Oak Ridge Estates. "For years, certain individuals have been manipulating this system for personal benefit," I continued, advancing to a slide showing pressure readings. Anita explained the data patterns, highlighting how tampering with my system created pressure drops for most homes but improved conditions for a select few properties, including Patricia's. The room grew tense as understanding dawned on many faces. Then came the most damning evidence, a compilation of security footage showing Patricia entering my property on multiple occasions, deliberately draining my water tank or closing critical valves. The timestamp on the most recent video was just 2 days ago. The footage clearly showed Patricia in her gardening clothes at 5:30 a.m., methodically opening a drain valve while checking her watch. A murmur swept through the room. Patricia's face had gone pale. "That could be anyone," she protested weakly. "We have 23 separate incidents documented," I replied, advancing to a slide showing dates, times, and corresponding screenshots, all coinciding with your garden watering schedule and HOA gardening awards judging dates. Janet stood up. "My mother has lived here for 40 years. She remembers when Patricia first moved in and began complaining about Harold Bishop's eyesore property while simultaneously benefiting from his water system." Other neighbors shared their experiences. Mysterious water pressure drops after opposing Patricia's HOA policies, sudden improvements when supporting her initiatives, consistent problems during garden competition seasons. The room's atmosphere had shifted completely. Board members exchanged uncomfortable glances, distancing themselves from Patricia both literally and figuratively by sliding their chairs slightly away. Thomas presented the official city documentation confirming my system's historical status and current compliance with all regulations. Far from being dangerous, this system has been maintaining proper water pressure for this neighborhood for decades, despite regular tampering. Patricia attempted several times to regain control of the meeting, but the evidence was overwhelming. When the video showed her deliberately falsifying water quality samples by adding substances to test tubes before submitting them to the city, audible gasps filled the room. I move that we table the action against the Bishop property and instead form an investigative committee regarding these allegations, said board member Robert Chen, who had previously supported Patricia unconditionally. The motion passed unanimously. Patricia sat frozen, her carefully constructed facade crumbling as neighbors she had manipulated for years saw her true actions exposed. The following week, Patricia resigned as HOA president. The board issued a formal apology to me and established a neighborhood water committee to properly document and protect the historical system my uncle had maintained. All fines were rescinded, and Patricia was required to pay for professional restoration of any damage her tampering had caused. 3 months later, I stood in my fully restored garden, watching neighbors chat across fences as children played in sprinklers powered by steady, reliable water pressure. The Victorian house no longer stood out as a neighborhood eyesore, but was recognized as a historical treasure housing essential infrastructure. My great-uncle Harold had understood something I was only beginning to appreciate. Sometimes the most important contributions are the invisible ones that keep everything flowing smoothly. As I checked the pressure gauges in the basement, now clearly labeled and properly documented, I felt his legacy living on through a neighborhood finally united by truth and flowing water.